While you saved cities, I learned how to survive when hope dies.
It wasn't betrayal. Doctor Strange called it salvation. Superman had lost control, and the Earth was next. The Avengers couldn't stop him. The Justice League wouldn't dare. So Strange did the unthinkable. He trapped the Man of Steel in an endless loop of time. Every second, Kal-El relived the moment he failed to save them. Again, and again, and again. But what happens when Superman remembers he's in the loop? They always thought Superman would be their last hope. Turns out, he became the final threat. It didn't happen all at once. It started with a silence. Not a scream, not a boom in the sky, just silence. The kind that blankets the earth when a god has made a decision. When Superman stopped speaking, the world should have known something was wrong. Metropolis had fallen. Not to Lex Luthor, not to Doomsday, not even to Darkseid. It had fallen to grief. Raw human grief. Lois Lane was gone. No villain. No warning. Just gone. Slipped through the cracks of a multiversal ripple no one could predict. Not even Doctor Strange, who felt it echo through dimensions. Clark didn't cry. He stood there, cape torn, holding her body like he still believed he could turn back time. And that's when something broke. No one said it aloud, but every hero watching knew it. The symbol on his chest no longer meant hope. In the weeks that followed, Superman started appearing in places no one expected. Latveria, Atlantis, Sokovia. Not to wage war, but to deliver judgment. He would appear, float silently above the cities, eyes glowing faintly red, and tell leaders that they were finished. Not punished, just finished. And they were. Criminal empires collapsed overnight. Political dynasties fell. Superman didn't kill. He didn't need to. The threat of him was enough to turn the world upside down. At first, they applauded him. Even Tony Stark said on live TV, maybe he's what this broken planet needs. But then came the ultimatum. Superman issued a global broadcast. No leader, no hero, no government had ever done this before. He said, no more war, no more corruption. You have 7 days to disarm all nuclear weapons and metahuman stockpiles, or I will do it for you. The Justice League tried to talk him down. Wonder Woman called it a divine overreach. Batman, he disappeared. The Avengers were divided. Thor respected his power. Banner feared it. Stark tried to contact Strange. Only one person claimed to understand him, Charles Xavier. And he disappeared too. The seventh day came. And so did Superman. In less than an hour, every known weapons vault from Wakanda to S.H.I.E.L.D. to Kamar-Taj was scorched clean. Without killing a single person, Superman dismantled the planet's defense systems. He stood above the UN building, arms folded, scanning the world with vision sharper than light. No one spoke. Cameras captured his face from every angle, and all saw the same thing. This was not the Superman they knew. And then came the rift. Not a natural phenomenon, not magic. A tear in the air above New York, a collapse between realms. From it, beings began to emerge. Not aliens, not demons, variants, broken versions of heroes, twisted by their own timelines. A dark Hulk, a fractured Scarlet Witch, an Iron Man who wore a suit made of bones. They weren't invading, they were running from a force chasing them across universes. And behind them, stepping through the rift, like he'd been waiting for the moment. Superman, another one, not the one on Earth. This one was darker, violent, eyes burning with fury. He was hunting them. The Earth's Superman stood silently, then looked up, and vanished. The world was no longer dealing with one problem. Now there were two Supermen, and only one Earth. That night, Strange summoned the Illuminati, not the secret cabal from Earth 838. A new one, hidden in the Sanctum Sanctorum, gathered in shadows. Among them, Stark, T'Challa, Reed Richards, Captain Marvel, and Zatanna. Only one chair sat empty, the one reserved for Superman. Clark's not the problem, Stark insisted. The other guy is... No, Strange said, eyes glowing faintly. They're both the problem. No one wanted to say it, but they knew. The real Superman had changed. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was power, or maybe something had entered his mind. A corruption, a fracture in reality bleeding into his thoughts. There was a rumor, whispered in corners of nowhere, that when Superman traveled between universes to chase his broken self, he saw something. Something no mind should ever witness. A truth about existence that broke his code. Whatever it was, he came back colder. So Strange made the choice. He didn't tell the League. He didn't tell the Avengers. Not even Wong. He would face Superman alone. He waited until midnight, when even gods were quiet. Superman arrived, as if summoned by fate itself, hovering in the moonlight above the sanctum. "I know why you called me," he said, voice calm. "You're becoming a danger to everything," Strange replied, stepping outside. "I'm saving them. You're controlling them." Superman didn't move. "What are you going to do, Steven?" "Cast a spell." Strange didn't smile, didn't threaten. He simply whispered, "No, I'm going to trap you in time." Superman's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." "I already have." The second he spoke, the world froze. Raindrops hung in the air like diamonds. Lights flickered and paused. Time fractured, folding in on itself. And at the center of it all, Superman stood still. But only outside. Inside his mind, he was still moving, still living, still remembering. The loop had begun. Strange didn't just freeze time. He bent it, crafted a loop so tight, so seamless, that Superman wouldn't even know he was inside it. Not at first. But Strange knew it was only a matter of time. And time was exactly what Superman no longer had. Dr. Strange had broken rules before. Time itself remembered that. But this time, the eye of Agamotto felt heavier than it ever had, like it was judging him back. The loop was holding. That alone was a miracle. Superman stood frozen above New York, caught in a moment stretched thinner than reality should allow. To the world, nothing had changed. People walked. Cars moved. The sky breathed. No alarms. No panic. Only Strange knew that the most powerful being on Earth was locked inside a cage made of seconds. And Strange hated himself for it. He returned to the sanctum and collapsed into meditation immediately, pulling his spirit beyond the physical plane. He needed to see the futures, all of them, because if even one ended in Superman breaking free too soon, Earth was already dead. The visions came fast, violent, unforgiving. In one future, Superman escaped the loop within minutes and shattered Kamartaj in a single scream. In another, the loop held for years, but when it finally broke, Superman emerged enlightened and judged humanity unworthy of survival. Strange watched worlds burn, over and over again. Each future ended the same way. Superman always remembered. Time did not erase him. It sharpened him. The Ancient One had warned him long ago. Never trap a being who can think faster than causality. Strange had done it anyway, because every future where he didn't was worse. The Avengers arrived within hours. They felt the magic ripple even if they didn't understand it. Tony Stark was the first to say what everyone else was thinking. "You imprisoned Superman." "I delayed him," Strange replied. "For how long?" Strange didn't answer. Challis spoke next, voice calm but edged with concern. "You used forbidden chronomancy." "Yes." "You didn't consult us." "No." "Then you fear we would have stopped you." Strange finally opened his eyes. "Because you would have." Thor stood apart, gripping Stormbreaker tightly. "My brother once walked this path. Believing control was mercy." "And how did that end?" Strange asked. Thor had no answer. Inside the loop, Superman relived the same day again and again. At first, it felt normal. Subtle differences, slight delays, conversations repeating with microscopic variations. His mind noticed patterns long before emotion caught up. By the 12th cycle, he knew. Time wasn't broken. It was watching him. Superman tested the world carefully. He moved faster, slower, changed outcomes. Each time, the day corrected itself. People reset. Damage vanished. Even his own words rewound when spoken too far from a script. But his memory stayed. That was the flaw. He remembered every loop. He remembered Lois dying in all of them. At first, rage consumed him. He punched the air so hard the sky fractured, only for the cracks to rewind like nothing happened. He screamed. Time swallowed it. Then came the thinking. Superman didn't fight the loop. He studied it. He began to see the edges, moments where causality blurred, where strange magic thinned under pressure. Tiny fractures, almost invisible. But Superman's senses weren't limited by dimensions. He started mapping the loop mentally. Each repetition gave him more data. Each failure made him smarter. Meanwhile, Strange grew weaker. Holding the loop wasn't a spell you cast and forgot. It required constant anchoring across timelines. His body aged faster than it should have. His hands trembled. Wong begged him to stop. You can't hold a god forever, Wong warned. I don't need forever, Strange replied. Just long enough. For what? Strange hesitated. For him to remember who he was. The problem was, Superman was remembering too much. In one of the futures Strange witnessed, Superman didn't break the loop with force. He forgave Strange, and that terrified him more than any violent ending. Because that version of Superman no longer believed in free will. The Justice League finally arrived. Wonder Woman demanded answers. Batman said nothing, but his silence was louder than accusation. He already knew the cost of the spell. He had contingencies forming in his mind. You crossed a line, Diana said. So did he, Strange replied. Batman finally spoke. How long until he escapes? Strange looked away. Sooner than I hoped. Inside the loop, Superman stopped testing the walls. He started changing himself. He slowed his thoughts, meditated, listened to time the way monks listen to breath. Each loop, he pushed his awareness deeper, beyond motion, beyond matter. He began to feel Strange, not his body, his strain. The spell was alive because Strange was feeding it. So Superman did something unexpected. He waited. Each loop, he became calmer, less resistance, less emotion. Strange felt it and mistook it for surrender. But it wasn't surrender. It was alignment. Superman synced his consciousness to the loop's rhythm. Where Strange pushed, Superman matched. Where time pulled, he flowed. The loop stopped fighting him. And in that moment, Superman understood something terrifying. Time wasn't his prison. It was his classroom. Strange's final vision, before collapse, showed Superman stepping out of the loop, not angry, not violent, but convinced. Convinced that Strange had proven something humanity never meant to. That even heroes would take freedom away if they were afraid enough. Strange severed the vision, gasping for breath. He knew now, the loop wasn't a solution. It was a test, and Superman was about to pass it. Superman stopped resisting the loop. That was the first sign something had changed. At first, Strange thought it was working. Less pressure, fewer temporal surges. The energy readings from the loop began to stabilize. Wong even called it a breakthrough. But Strange knew better. This wasn't peace. It was quiet before something worse. Inside the loop, Superman wasn't trapped anymore. He was exploring. Time is like glass. At first, it looks solid, unbreakable. But if you know where to tap it, just hard enough, just often enough, it begins to crack. And Superman had been tapping in silence, without leaving a trace. He spoke to the same people every day, saw the same faces, fought the same small fights. But now he was watching, recording every fluctuation, every flicker in behavior, every stray butterfly wing. And slowly he realized the loop wasn't perfect. It reset events, but not him. His thoughts, his feelings, even his muscle memory carried over. That was the gift and the curse. Each loop, he was a little bit stronger, a little more precise, a little more in sync with the flow of causality. And then he discovered the seam. It was microscopic, a fraction of a moment just before the loop reset, where time hesitated. Not long enough to act, but long enough to feel. And Superman could feel everything. The heartbeat of the multiverse. The whisper of a broken dimension. The faint psychic pain of Doctor Strange straining to hold the spell together. It wasn't just a seam. It was a signal. Strange wasn't controlling the loop anymore. He was surviving it. Superman adjusted his approach. Less brute force, more surgical precision. He started bending the loop to his will, delaying reactions, slowing resets. In one loop, he moved so slowly, so carefully, that the entire day passed without triggering a reset. That's when he knew he was no longer inside a trap. He was inside a conversation, and time was finally listening. Outside, Strange was unraveling. His hands bled from strain. His mind flinched every time the spell trembled. Wong begged him to shut it down before it was too late. But Strange refused, because if he stopped and Superman had truly changed, there'd be no one left to stop what came next. Tony Stark had already started building countermeasures, just in case. A multiversal dampener, quantum bleed generators. Nothing that would hold Superman, but things that might slow him. "We're not building Cage," Stark told Bruce. "We're building a coffin." Bruce didn't respond. He just stared at the screen showing Superman's still form in the sky, unmoving, but not asleep. He was waiting. Then it happened. The loop didn't break. It inverted. On what should have been the 743rd reset, Superman reached the end of the day, and time did not rewind. It expanded. Reality folded outward instead of in, and Superman stepped forward, not with violence, not with wrath, but with understanding. He wasn't just outside the loop. He was carrying it with him. Strange felt the shift like a knife to the chest. His eyes snapped open. The spell was still active, but no longer bound to the earth. Superman had taken control of it. He was rewriting the rules. And for the first time, Strange saw a future he'd never imagined. Superman using the loop as a weapon, not a prison, not a lesson, a method. What if every villain he faced could be trapped like he was? What if every government on Earth could be paused, corrected, adjusted? What if humanity didn't need to learn anymore, because Superman could just reset them until they got it right? It was no longer about grief. It was no longer about justice. It was about perfect order, and only one man was worthy of shaping it. Strange rose, barely able to stand, and spoke the words he swore he'd never say. "Call everyone. The Avengers, the League, mutants, sorcerers, cosmic entities, anyone willing to risk everything." Because Superman had transcended physical power. He was now a temporal force of nature, and he was coming back to reality with a mission. He descended from the sky, without a word, floating gently above the sanctum. His eyes glowed, not red, not blue, white. Pure temporal energy pulsed through him. He had seen thousands of lives, lived 1,000 versions of the same day, fought and forgiven everyone, over and over. And he had made his decision. "I don't want to destroy this world," he said, voice echoing through dimensions. "I want to fix it, and I will." Strange stepped forward, trembling. "What gives you the right?" Superman didn't hesitate. Time. He vanished in a pulse of light, and across the globe, clocks began to skip. Not break, skip. Moments of clarity, moments of fear, moments people thought they imagined. Lovers who forgot they were angry, soldiers who forgot they were enemies, politicians who paused mid-speech and changed their minds. Reality was being edited, not violently, precisely. Doctor Strange collapsed, knowing what had happened. The loop was no longer an isolated construct. It was now everywhere, and Superman was its master. The world didn't fall all at once. It bent. Reality itself began to curve under Superman's hand, subtly, perfectly, terrifyingly. At first, it felt like peace. Global crime rates dropped 76% in a week. Wars paused mid-battle with soldiers stunned by what they'd just forgotten. Diplomats who hated each other walked out of negotiations with rewritten memories and handshakes they didn't remember offering. No one could prove it, but everyone felt it. Time wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to him. News anchors stuttered on air. repeating phrases they didn't remember writing. Scientists found formulae on their whiteboards they didn't recall solving. Children spoke of dreams where they saw a man in red and blue whispering to the sky, asking it to do better. And across the multiverse, a ripple began. Not destruction, a recalibration. Superman wasn't just editing the timeline, he was correcting it, one loop at a time. Only a handful of minds could detect the subtle variations. People like Reed Richards, Professor X, Zatanna, even Khan. Beings who'd lived inside temporal fractures. They gathered not by choice, but by instinct, drawn together by the primal fear that something unnatural had taken control of causality itself. They called it the seamless loop, a perfect loop running behind reality, governed not by machines or magic, but by Superman's evolving will. Doctor Strange was barely alive when they reached him. He lay on the floor of the sanctum, a shell of who he was. His body hadn't moved, but his spirit had spent centuries holding the original loop. They asked him what happened. He said only 4 words. He made it portable. That was all they needed to hear. The plan formed quickly, not to kill Superman. No one believed that was possible anymore. They needed to break the loop, because as long as Superman carried that engine of time on his back, there was no victory. Every choice could be overwritten. Every rebellion could be reset. Wanda Maximoff was the first to volunteer. She'd walked broken timelines. She'd felt the madness of multiversal collapse. If anyone could poke a hole in the loop from the inside, it was her. But she needed power. She needed anchors. People rooted in reality enough to withstand the rewind. Logan volunteered. So did Jean Grey. Thor stepped forward, not as a god, but as someone who had seen too many futures die young. They called themselves the Anchors. Their mission was simple: create a fracture large enough that Superman couldn't rewind without tearing the loop apart. The rest would be distraction. The Avengers, the X-Men, the League, magic users, guardians, even beings who never aligned under any banner. Everyone came, because this wasn't a war between good and evil. It was survival versus submission, and time was already turning against them. Superman knew. He didn't hide. He floated above the earth, arms folded, glowing with the soft pulse of the seamless loop flowing through his veins. His voice echoed across every screen, every broadcast, every language. I see what you're doing, and I forgive you. That terrified them more than a threat, because they knew if he forgave them before it even happened, it meant he'd already seen it fail. But still, they moved. The Anchors gathered in Wakanda, where Shuri constructed the last stable time shell core on Earth. Wanda opened the breach using forbidden chaos magic, pulling a rift in reality so sharp it sliced through cause and effect. Superman didn't stop them. Not yet. He wanted to see if they truly understood. The heroes launched their strike, coordinated attacks in multiple dimensions, forcing Superman to choose. Iron Man engaged him in Earth orbit with tech powered by broken timelines. Batman launched phantom logic bombs designed to collapse probability space. Dr. Fate pulled gravity backward. None of it worked. Superman didn't fight back. He simply looped. Every attack was anticipated. Every hit was dodged before it was thrown. The seamless loop reacted faster than thought. Reality shimmered and snapped into the timeline he preferred. Wanda screamed through the breach, her body tearing between seconds, forcing the fracture wider. Thor held the anchor point against a gravitational tide that had no source. Logan's claws slashed through echo versions of Superman, copies thrown at them from failed loops. They made it to the core. Wanda looked back one final time, saw Superman standing in the center of infinite copies of himself. He wasn't fighting them. He was watching them fail, just like he always had. She unleashed everything. Chaos magic, temporal entropy, multiversal bleed. The fracture reached the loop, and it ripped. A crack echoed across reality, a sound that only souls could hear. People dropped to their knees. Stars pulsed. The moon fractured slightly, and then stillness. No reset, no rewind. Time stuttered, like a machine unsure if it had just been unplugged. In the silence, Superman descended. Not angry, not defeated, but tired. He touched the edge of the broken loop, now flickering like a dying heartbeat. He looked at Wanda, bleeding and barely alive. "I was trying to save them." She didn't answer. "You still think they deserve the choice?" Wanda nodded weakly. "That's what makes it worth saving." Superman stood still for a long moment. And then he let go. The loop dissolved. Not shattered, not broken, released. Like an old song fading into silence. And with it, Superman vanished into the time stream. Not as a conqueror, not as a god, but as someone finally willing to not be in control. The loop was gone. Not broken, not destroyed, released. Time flowed freely again, wild, untamed, chaotic. And for the first time in what felt like forever, reality breathed. The world didn't cheer. There was no victory parade, no bright sunrise over a saved planet, just silence, heavy and uncertain. Superman had vanished. No one saw where he went. He didn't crash. He didn't fall. He simply disappeared, like a final page turned in a story that no one had the strength to finish. Wanda collapsed beside the remnants of the time shell core. Her eyes were open, staring at a sky that no longer repeated itself. The other anchors rushed to her side. Thor was barely holding together, lightning flickering erratically across his skin. Logan's healing factor was failing, not from wounds, but from temporal fatigue. His cells had aged in different directions. Shuri stood over them, stunned, whispering the same phrase over and over. He let go, he actually let go. Somewhere in Kamartaj, Dr. Strange sat in meditation, quietly weeping. Not from pain, but from awe. He had tried to control time. Superman had held it in his hands, and then chose not to. That was something even gods rarely did. The world slowly pieced itself back together. But it wasn't the same. Some things had changed permanently. Memories from failed timelines leaked into people's dreams. Nightmares of moments that never happened. Regrets over choices they never made. Children described events that no one had ever told them about. Things they couldn't possibly know. The timeline was no longer linear. It was haunted. The governments of the world tried to stabilize. Council meetings were held in hushed tones. SHIELD, SWORD, and even the TVA quietly rebooted their protocols. Mutants, gods, and machines met in secret to discuss what came next. Because if Superman could rewrite time, who's to say someone else wouldn't try? Tony Stark began working on a containment protocol, not for Superman, but for the loop itself, in case traces of it still existed. Reed Richards built a sensor that could detect timeline fractures in real time. It pinged every 3 seconds. Batman returned to the cave, silent as a statue. He added one name to his files, not under threats, not under allies, but under a new category, unknowable. Clark Kent's apartment in Metropolis remained untouched. The plants on the balcony somehow survived. The mail stacked up. The world kept expecting him to return, to land on the Daily Planet's roof, to smile, to say it was all a misunderstanding. But he didn't. Superman didn't die. He became something else. Some say he exists outside of time now, watching, not interfering. Others believe he fractured into every version of himself across the multiverse, quietly living 1,000 lives to understand humanity. The only person who might have known was Wanda. She recovered weeks later and refused to speak of what she saw in the loop's collapse. Not to the X-Men, not to the League, not even to Strange. But one night, Jean Grey sat beside her. They didn't speak, not for hours. Then Wanda whispered, "He didn't forgive us because we were right." Jean blinked. Then why? Because he remembered what it meant to be human. And that was the truth. In the center of the seamless loop, after centuries of repetition, after grief, rage, clarity, and silence, Superman didn't find power. He found understanding, the burden of seeing the worst of humanity and choosing not to become its judge. He could have rewritten everything, made a perfect Earth, a world without war, without hate, without pain, but it wouldn't have been real. It would have been a loop, And deep down, even gods long to live just once, truly, and without control. Years passed. Statues were built, not of Superman the Savior, but Superman the Question. Some feared his return, others prayed for it. A few believed he never left. Time moved on, and then one day, a child walked into a burned field in Kansas. Nothing special, just miles of blackened soil and ash after a firestorm. No one could explain how the child got there, barefoot and smiling, holding a glowing crystal that pulsed like a heartbeat. He looked up at the sky and laughed. They said his eyes flashed for just a second. Not red, not blue, white. And the wind whispered through the grass. Let them choose. The end.